All right, so a few lessons ago, we started talking about polyrhythms, and we did just a basic introduction to what they are, how to play them, and specifically how to count out and play the 2/3 polyrhythm. What I want to do now is specifically look at 3/4, but also just cover all the rest and show you the techniques that you need if you want to do some of these harder ones. It's a bit of a quantum leap from 2/3 to anything harder than that. They get exponentially much more difficult, and you need a couple new ideas if you want to do these. Now, I'm not going to focus on the practicing part. I'm going to go ahead and save that for the next lesson because, like I said, it's so much harder. And we'll focus on how to get them up to tempo, how to keep everything even, and I'll show you a couple tools and techniques you can use for that. For now, it'll just be how to count them out, how to make sense of it, and how to teach it to yourself at a very slow, even tempo. Okay, so 3/4, it's going to look like this. You have a beat, and you're going to be dividing that beat into 3 equal parts, so you can think of this like a triplet. Did I pick up the same color? I think I did. Anyway, you're going to have 3 notes. Each one of them lasts for exactly 1/3 of the beat. So, and you count this out like a triplet, so triplet, triplet, or however you like to count that. And for now, we'll play it here. What a mess. Play it like this. Triplet, triplet. Okay? And then at the same time, you're also going to be dividing the beat into 4 parts. So think of this like straight 16ths. And I usually count this out as 1E and 2E and again, doesn't really matter exactly how you count it. So that will play here. 1E and okay. Easy enough. Now the triplet, or the polyrhythm part of this, is when you play these 2 things at the same time. That's what makes it a polyrhythm. So that would sound something like this. Okay? Relatively straightforward, but it has a very interesting and just different kind of sound to it. Now, we have the same problem here that we did last time with 2/3. How do you count this out, and how do you get every note in its exact right place? Now, if you use this method of the triplet, triplet, that works fine for this, but it doesn't tell you where these notes go. And vice versa, if you count this out, you don't know exactly where to put these notes. So we need a counting system. We need some way of counting out the time through this beat that gives us a place to put every single note exactly. Now, when we did 2/3, and I'll kind of wedge this in here, we had the same issue, and I just said, well, to count this out, just count 1 and 2 and 3 and that'll let you put every note in the right spot, which is all well and good, but obviously the thing I didn't tell you was how you know how to divide up that beat to count out every note. And counting 1 and 2 and 3 and is not going to help us here. So here's how you figure that out. And this goes for any polyrhythm, not just 3/4. So what we need is we need to figure out how to divide up this beat. We're going to have some number of beat divisions, and we need a certain number that we can divide into 3 equal groups, and at the same time divide into 4 equal groups. So for example, if we cut this beat into 6 parts, we have the first part starting here, say, okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We cut it into 3 equal parts, or 6 equal parts. That will let us do 3 equal groups. So we could say that this note lasts for the first 2, this lasts for the next 2, and this lasts for the next 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that number, 6, works just fine to do this. But it does not work for the 4. We can't take these 6 beat divisions and put them in 4 equal groups. So we need a number that works for both. And we want the lowest number we can find. a gigantic number, 3,000 beat divisions or something might work, but we want the lowest one because that's going to be much simpler to work with. So one way to do this is to just guess. You could say, well, 3 didn't work, 4 didn't work, 5 probably won't work, 6 didn't work, so just do 7, and then 8, and eventually you'll find one that does work. And that's fine. You're probably not going to be doing lots and lots of different polyrhythms. It's just going to be a handful, so that's not the worst thing. You can go ahead and the first time through just figure it out by guessing. But there is a much simpler way. And before I show you that, I'll just kind of spoil the ending here and show you what we're actually looking for. We want 12 beat divisions. So dividing this beat up into 12 different pieces gives us a way of lining up every single note. These start on 1, this one's on 4, this one's on 5. And if we sat there and counted out every single number, every single little beat division, we can put every note in its right place and slowly teach that rhythm to yourself and learn it. But how do you get to 12? So like I said, you can just start guessing and eventually you'll come on 12, you'll realize that it works, and there you go. But there is a simpler way. And if you're a math person, this is called least common multiple. It's actually a very simple idea. We have 4 beat divisions down here. So 4. If we multiply 4 by 2, that gives us 8. And that 4 by 2, one way to think of that is, 4 groups of 2. So we know for a fact that 8 is going to divide evenly into 4. We could also get 12, 16, 20. We probably don't need to go too far. But these are all the numbers that will divide evenly by 4. Then you can do the same thing for the group of 3. Say, well, 3 times 2 would be 6, or 3 times 3 would be 9, or 12, 15, 18, and so on. And again, we're just looking for the lowest number that's going to work for both of these. So there you go. 12 would be the lowest. Now, if you were doing something else, say 6 over 4, you could do the same thing. Start with 6, you'd have 12, and 18, and 24, and so on. And you could do the same thing for 4. You get 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. It's hard doing math on camera, but I think I got that. And you would find the same thing. Actually, 12 will also work for 6 over 4. If you did 7 over 5, I think you'd wind up with 30. No, that's not right. 35, I guess. Again, don't do math on camera, but I think that's it. Same concept. You're going to look for the lowest number that is multiplied by, or is an even multiple of both numbers. Anyway, and again, if that doesn't quite sit right, you can just guess. You're not going to do too many of these in your life, I don't think. So we have our number 12. I didn't want to get rid of that. We have our number 12. You can count that out, and you can find the exact place to put every single note. But obviously, that's not ideal. Counting from 1 to 12 is very awkward, and there's kind of a bigger problem. And this goes for almost any time you're trying to learn something. Remember, your goal here is to internalize this. You want this to, at some point, feel natural, where you could just play it and you don't need to think about it. And it's just something that's kind of embedded itself in your brain. But when you're focusing on something, you can only hold 5 or 6 things in your short-term memory at once. You start adding anything else, and something kind of falls out the back. And the problem is that to internalize this, you have to be able to play it and feel comfortable with it. And you can't be having to focus on every single note every time you play it, which is what will happen. If you're trying to think about 12 different little beat divisions every single time, by the time you get to the end, you forgot what happens at the beginning, and you're never able to just sit there and play it and get it internalized like we want. So the way around that is to divide this up into smaller groups, and because groups are so much easier for your mind to hold on to, it's no longer a bunch of little things. It's kind of just one thing that you can think about as a whole. Like there's the first part of this and the next part of this and the next part. And that makes it so there's only a handful of things you have to think about. Now, a good way to look at this, and this might be a little bit weird to think about, but you can start to look at this as if it's a measure of music. Now it's not. This is actually just one beat, but the whole idea of grouping a measure and dividing everything up into different beats is that it does that for you. It gives you a way to think about that and a way to find patterns, and it's just a logical grouping of notes and accents and everything. We can treat this the same way. So if you pretend that we have a measure and say it's a measure of, I think we'll say 12/8. If you're not familiar with that, don't worry too much. It should be clear from context. If we look at this as if we have our first beat starting here, and we can just count 1 and 2 and so on. We can just count it like that. Treat it as if there's 4 different beats here, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that's much simpler to think about, and it's actually something familiar. Hopefully you've played with something similar to that before. So what you would do is you could even start with just looking at the first half of this, say take the first 2 beats, or pretend beats I guess, and start practicing with that. So these two notes both start on 1. You have 1 and 2 and that's the first part. And you can sit there and try to get comfortable with that. 1 and 2 and okay. And then you work on the next part. These 2 pretend beats, and you'd have 3 and 4 and so if you put those together, be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and okay. Now, same idea as before with the 2/3. You can start by counting it out, make sure you have everything in exactly the right place, and you can even do the first half and then the second half, or even smaller if you need to. Remember that the idea here is that you're grouping things and trying to let your mind understand an entire section of this without having to count 12 distinct beats out. You practice it slow, say it out loud, and then eventually switch to just counting it in your head, and then you can slowly start to work the tempo up. There is something different about this one though. With 2/3, it's a lot simpler when you work the tempo up, because regardless of how you're counting it, this note falls directly in between these 2. So unless you have one of these notes, pushed off to the side, you're playing it too fast or too slow, most likely this rhythm tends to stay correct. This note is nicely right in between these 2 notes, so it's unlikely you're going to be playing this too late or too early. It feels pretty good right here. But when you start playing this a lot faster, if you look at this note, for example, this note happens closer to this one than to that one, and as you play it quicker, this note has a tendency to drift and fall directly in between them, and you'll wind up playing something more like this rhythm, as if you're playing some kind of 30-second note. And same thing for this one. It's actually supposed to be closer to this note. I didn't draw that as good as I could have, but it's supposed to be closer to this note than that note, but it's going to want to drift right in the middle. So the techniques for practicing this and keeping that from happening are a bit tricky, and like I said, that's something we'll focus on next time. But you could take this same approach and do any other polyrhythm you wanted to. Obviously, they can start to get really difficult where you're having to count lots and lots of little beat divisions. But if you change your perspective a little bit and treat this as if it's an entire measure where you're breaking it into these little pretend beats, you can make it into something fairly familiar and simple, and you can learn it that way, and then slowly kind of morph that into playing it quickly and treating it like it's just one beat. So I think that's it for now. Hopefully that's enough to get you started on any of the other ones, and like I said, next week I'll show you some tools and ways of getting your head around this and playing it quickly and whatnot. So let me know what you think and if you have questions, and I will see you next week.